I'm fascinated.
criminal law is sexy. Like that's what it is. Like everyone's always like criminal law is the sexy one. You're in
Yeah.
court, you're in trial almost every day. Like it's sexy. That's what it is. And the reason she bombed all of them except the eye test where they flash the light in your eye and like track your eye thing, it's because she had a Brazilian butt lift. Yeah, so she wasn't able to do the walk and turn properly because it was pretty fresh.
Okay.
I hate saying that word. It was pretty fresh.
What's up, guys? I'm here with Patrick Short, and we're going to discuss his experiences at the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
It's
of
good
course,
to,
man.
Good to be here.
Yeah, glad we're finally doing this. So let's just, start right off. Like, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. We obviously went to law school together. But...
Right. Yeah. No. So I'm Patrick Short. Start from the beginning. Military brat. So I grew up like everywhere every 3 years. Somehow landed in Baltimore for law school. No idea how, but here I am. Haven't left since.
Yeah, and so what made you want to get into law?
It was a last resort. I majored in political science with minors in international studies and history, and I realized that wasn't gonna do anything for me in Pensacola of all places.
Okay.
So like Southern Florida, Bible Belt.
Right.
And I was like, okay, let me take a gap year, see what I can do. Idea of law school popped in my mind, and I was like, let's try it. Why not?
And so you moved to Baltimore for law school.
Yeah. I applied to. I think it was Baltimore. I can't remember the other schools. It was like DePaul or something in Chicago, but Baltimore took me. I was like, okay, I'll go to Baltimore.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad, 'cause that's how we met. Um, yeah. So, all right, let's talk about the time in law school. Right.
Oh, gosh, flashbacks.
Yeah. I remember a certain professor rubbed you the wrong way. What is it? Our first year. We don't have to get into that.
Who? Which one? There's a lot of them.
Yeah. Any stories you want to share? Any?
Not really. I mean, it's just, I just remember 3L year, we were taking Fed income tax. This was in 2020, so spring of 2020. I think we were probably the dumbest kids in there. We had no idea I can't remember who the professor was, but
I didn't pay much attention.
we just sat next to each other. We were just messing around the entire time. And it was like right before COVID too, because I remember I was going to move in with. And I was like, oh, I'll take the week off right before spring break. And I never showed up for class again because we went virtual.
Right.
But no, I think that was probably one of the most fun classes I've had with you because we just sat next to each other. We're just like, we're not here. Like, we're here for our credits, like just in and out.
Yeah. There was what was that one? Where she called me Krishaw.
Oh, Krishaw. That was
Model rules of professional conduct.
Professional responsibility.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Krishaw is a very.
We were playing that game in class.
Oh, what was that? That was
Word of the
day.
Word
of the day.
Word of the day.
Yeah. So in
they
that
never
class,
caught on, but like the rest of the class did.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So word of the day, we basically decided to pick one random word, and we.
Law students don't do this.
Yeah, do not do this. It was it was like 30 or 40 of us by that time. It was a class of like 50. And we all had a word of the day, and we had to use that word every time we were called on or asking a question. So it was like, the word would be like bananas. And one of our classmates, he was like, yeah, like, the verdict in this case is bananas. Like, the stance the court is taking is just bananas here. And then she was like, I like that. Bananas.
And we got extra points if the professor said it
Right,
as well.
yeah. And we changed the word every day. So it'd be like, bananas, muffin, elephant.
It was mainly, I feel like it was mainly me and...
Yeah,
like,
it was you and but a few people, they joined in. But, gosh.
It turned an otherwise pretty dry subject into a fun class.
And you paid attention a little bit more because you were like, hey, how can I use this word?
Exactly.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah, that was a good time. I guess since we're talking about law school real quick, is there just, I guess, some general advice you might give for people that like are in law school? Like how do you excel in law school? How would you do a really good job?
It's going to be counterintuitive. What I'm going to say is set boundaries and know your limits. So, I mean, that's kind of the same thing. I guess look after your mental health too. So it's like, law school is a full-time job. You're studying from like 9 to 5. If you work, if you're a night student, you're working 9 to 5 and then you're going to class, doing your homework over the weekends, your readings, whatever, outlining. But like set boundaries, like have a cutoff time where you're like, okay, I'm going to stop at 7. I'm going to cook dinner, take an hour and a half, relax, Mental health, go to bed by 10. If you need a day off, do that. Just don't, what's the word? Don't overdo it. You're gonna kill yourself doing that. It's exhausting.
Yeah. I remember one all year they kept, obviously they would assign like tons of reading, right? Like
Right.
hundreds of pages of reading. And your incentive to do them was essentially like the Socratic method, right? Like you're worried about being cold called and
Right.
just being put on the spot.
It's hazing.
Yeah, yeah. How did you end up dealing with those, large, like there's some kids, right? They go to law school, right? Young adults, whatever. They go to law school and they immediately like start freaking out, like, oh my God, I have 100 pages to read. I got to read every single one, highlight every single page. I know I stopped doing that very quickly.
Oh yeah, you learn, law school is a game. You learn how to read a 30-page case and pull the opinion and pull what each particular professor is looking for and kind of what you need. So like in a lot of case law, it's called dicta, where they just the court just rambles on, Scalia, cough, cough, just kind of rambles on for 20 pages, and then you get the opinion. It's like hidden away. But you learn to look for those things and how to pull it and how to analyze kind of what the professors are going to be asking you about that. So I don't like traditionalist things, but like it's like a rite of passage where you learn how to read an opinion. They teach you how to read it, what you're looking for, how to decipher it, and how to outline everything. Mm-hmm. But it's 100 pages that gets knocked down to like an hour of work by the end, like right. By your 2L3 all year.
Yeah, I can say. I'll be honest. I stopped doing that completely.
Well, yeah, you pull your outlines up, like you go on like
that.
Quimby, whatever.
Yeah, there was that. I never really wanted to pay for it. What I did was actually all the cases we're dealing with were, they're famous, like they're landmark Supreme Court cases. So like, Google it.
Right, like, exactly. Like you can pull
article.
Exactly. It'll tell you how the judges rule, like what happened, and then like the precedent after. It's like, okay, well, this case happened in 1950. Right. What's the evolution of it? What happened in like the 60s, 70s, and like so on and so forth.
Yeah. Obviously, the only downside is you don't learn how to read cases quickly and like
right.
to read like a lawyer. So put in the work. You do need to learn how to read these cases pretty fast. But after a certain point, you can just kind of
right, especially in law school because the stakes aren't high. But as a lawyer, you want to make sure that you are reading those cases and understanding. Even if you're still speed reading, you want to make sure that you're pulling the entire case because there could be one part of a case that totally goes for your case, and you're like, oh yeah, I found the perfect case. But then turns out at the end of it, it's against you, and you're like, shit, like, well, now I screwed my client over, Right. So you want to make sure that you're just reading it and understanding it in full and like what those lines of cases say.
Awesome. Okay. Let's move. So during your time in law school, you also like it's called Rule 19 here in Maryland. You're basically, is it clerking? You're clerking for. You can basically stand in front of a judge and like represent a client as long as you're overseen.
Yeah, it's not clerking. So I call it just being like a student attorney.
Okay.
And in order to do it, you have to go through like certain clinics at the law school. So our school, University of Baltimore, they had the criminal clinic, family law. I think it was like the Innocence Project. It's like the income or the tax clinic. And so I did the criminal clinic because I had an interest in criminal law, and I got put in with the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. And so in that class, it's basically divided into a in-session class, like you meet once or twice a week for about 3 hours, and then you just kind of set your own hours for working at the clinic, outside of the clinic. So there were maybe about 14 of us my semester, and we were all like throughout different counties. So some people would be in Baltimore County, Harford County, whatever. Some would do defense side, public defender. Some would do the state side with the state's attorney's office. And you get sworn in, and you can basically, like you just said, practice before a judge. So the thing with the state's attorney's office in the city was that I was given a case from scratch and was told, contact the police officers, contact the victims, work it out, but work with the supervisor, just check in with them, make sure you're doing everything okay. And then you get into court and you call the case, which was kind of rare because a lot of people in the class in other counties weren't allowed to do that. So I was technically acting as a prosecutor and calling cases for the state of Maryland. And it was really intimidating because I was in my second year of law school, and I was like, shit, this is a lot of responsibility. Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. And the judge obviously knows you're a student,
Right.
Okay.
So you have to like say like a certain thing. So with the state's attorney's office, whenever you call a case, you say now calling state of Maryland versus, use your example, Christian Zaveri,
Right.
case number, blah, blah, blah. Patrick Short on behalf of the state, practicing pursuant to Rule 19 under the supervision of blah, blah, blah. So that way the judge is like, okay, like let me, turn my brain off a little less. As a student attorney, won't grill him as much, but some do. So I had the pleasure of being grilled by a few judges because they heard the Rule 19 thing. They were like, okay, let's test him. Let's test him, see what he knows.
Yeah. Tell us about that. What happened there?
So it was like my first case I called, and the judge asked me a question about like bond, because I guess the defendant didn't show up, and I was like, well, I don't have an opinion, so I was like, I'm just gonna defer. And like I turned to my supervisor and I was like, what do I say? What do I say? And he's like, just give it your best shot, just like whatever. So I was like, okay, the state defers to the court, and the judge, he made that face, and he was just kind of like, he kind of did that, like shook his head, and he was like, not the answer I wanted. So we go through the rest of the cases off the record, and he was like, Mr. Short, and I was like, yes, Your Honor, and he was just like, always have an opinion, just even if it's the wrong one, always have an opinion in court, never defer to the court, because like that's. So I was just like, you learn, it's trial by fire.
Yeah,
it's trial by fire.
Yeah. Interesting. So what kind of cases were you handling as a Rule 19 attorney?
So it was in district court. So those are just always misdemeanors or like minor traffic. Okay. Sometimes you get handgun cases coming through there, but we weren't allowed to touch those. So my cases were usually assaults, thefts. At the time, this was like right before, like a lot of things changed pre-COVID. So we were still doing prostitution and drugs. So like some of those cases, not necessarily carjackings, but like people found in stolen vehicles, unauthorized use of vehicles. And then for traffic, just driving without a license. I think that was it. Yeah, because we couldn't do hit and runs, fleeing, eluding, or DUIs.
Okay.
Just like very like minor stuff, kind of almost low stakes, but not really low stakes.
What is, and just so I don't deal with any criminal, dude. What is the difference between a misdemeanor and I'm guessing the opposite is a felony, or the next level is a felony?
Yeah, I still don't know. I still don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
I mean, I do, but like it's just like where it lands in court and like the penalties for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think misdemeanors, I don't remember the penalties. It's a certain amount of time.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just like
So
how
like
like
the max amount of time you can.
Yeah,
go for it.
and I
Okay.
should know this, but it's been a while.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Basically, misdemeanor, small fry things.
Sure,
Felonies,
yeah,
Felonies
yeah.
are the murders and the.
Yeah, and like carjackings, yeah.
Cool. Gotcha. So after you graduated, you went straight back to the prosecutor's office?
Yeah, so between then, so it's like I was stuck in that office for like the entirety of law school, and I loved it because I started there as an intern in misdemeanors, like the jury trial. So like every case that, if you're in district court and they have a jury trial, right, and they parade it a jury trial, it gets shot to the circuit court, and then the misdemeanor jury trial team would just handle it there. So it's just putting on a case from district court in front of a jury of 12 people in the city. So nothing really changes there.
Okay.
But I was an intern there, then did the Rule 19, and then I got brought on as a part-time law clerk for the GTTF project. So it was a gun trace task force.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother story. But it was basically like writing every single motion to overturn. It was like 800 convictions that were tainted by these gun trace task force officers in the city.
All right. So I believe there's an HBO show
Yeah.
about this. Can you explain what this was? What is GTT?
Yeah.
What is
So the gun trace task force was a unit, and it's in the name. They find guns, get rid of guns, take them off the street, because the city was plagued with gun cases. It still is. But this unit, they were basically allowed to go rogue and just had like almost no supervision, no control, and they basically let the power get to their heads. They were planting drugs, taking guns, reselling them. It was just a mess. It was a disservice to the people of the city, and basically just super corrupt cops going unchecked, lying in the court. Yeah, just a mess.
Okay. And I believe the main character in the HBO show is John Berthel, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and he plays Wayne Jenkins.
Okay.
I think all of them are still incarcerated in federal prison right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what was your role specifically in this?
Yeah, so I would go in and basically we look at so every officer in Baltimore City Police Department, they have a sequence number that identifies them.
Okay.
So I believe Wayne Jenkins was like an H something. It was like H383. I don't know off the top of my head. And basically we look at every case that involves that sequence number.
Okay.
And then we cross-verify to say, okay, what involvement did he have in that case? Was he the primary officer? Did he spot the probable cause leading to the arrest? Was he the arresting officer? Or was he just standing around and watching? Was he called as backup? If he was just called as backup, we look and see, okay, could this case be put on without Wayne Jenkins being brought into court? If it could, the conviction stays. Mm-hmm. But if for some reason it can't, if we need Wayne Jenkins as a witness in this case in order to convict this defendant, then you got to throw it out.
You just throw out the whole case because
Yeah.
he's so toxic. Okay.
Yeah, and it was
Gotcha.
it was a lot of drug cases, a lot of gun possession cases.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 700.
Oh wow.
And then you start switching to like other officers. So I know there was like in that HBO show, We Own the City,
Mm-hmm.
there was a officer that planted like a BB gun, and so we started looking into that, and then other officers from there.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it was just like a check, like kind of like a check on what's going on with BPD, kind of before it gets to the PIU unit, Public Integrity Unit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. While we're kind of talking about all this stuff, there's a lot of terminology in, I guess, the criminal, like,
Yeah.
realm, the criminal law aspect that, like, I, you know, I think it would be helpful to clear it up, right? So, like,
Yeah.
for example, like, there are words like indictment, right? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so the way like a case gets to a court, you can either be arrested by an officer or be indicted for a charge. So when you're indicted for a charge, it's usually a felony. It's not going to go to district court. It's going to circuit court. And what that means is you go before a grand jury and you just present a case. It's very low standard. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a standard for a case, for like a trial. And it's just basically, it's I think it's whether it's probable he did it or something like that.
What is a grand jury?
So think of like a jury, like in your typical trial, you have a jury of 12 people. This is about, I think it's about 30 people, 30 to 40 people, give or take. And they serve for about 6 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they just hear cases from the state. So they come in 9 to 5 or 9 to like 3, however long the day is. And each unit in the state's attorney's office will come in and present their cases. So like special victims unit, they'll come in and present their cases. Homicide, they'll come in and present their cases. They'll bring the police officer, detective, witnesses and stuff. And then they issue an indictment, meaning, okay, there's probable cause to issue an arrest warrant for this person and then bring it to the circuit court.
Okay. And this grand jury is composed of just like a normal jury, just people.
Yeah. So it's like when you get a jury summons. Like you just get summons for grand jury.
But you'd have to do that for like
Yeah, it's
months.
it's an extended period, yeah, but it's generally easier to get out of because you're not working for those 3 months,
Right,
So it's
yeah.
like financial hardships are definitely a big thing. But yeah.
In your experience, have you seen a lot of grand juries, have an ultimate result where they're like, oh no, there isn't enough, probable cause for an arrest warrant?
I personally, after the GTCF project, I was a law clerk in GVED, the Gun Violence Enforcement Division, and I would go as the law clerk and read to the grand jury. So I go with an attorney, and the attorney would just be like, here's the defendant's name, date of birth, these are the charges he's facing. You'll now hear from the reader. I get sworn in, which is always fun, so I got to raise your right hand. You swear under the penalties of perjury, and I read the case. I've never had a case come back as not being indicted because the attorneys, the way they wrote the indictments, it was so well written, but also like we didn't issue bullshit indictments. If there was an indictment to be issued, then it's going to be issued. But like if there's nothing to go on, the attorneys I worked for, they wouldn't waste the time or the resources and try and do it. They'd just be like, no, we can't go forward on it.
Okay. Does politics play a role in this at all?
Of course, it always does. Yeah, I mean,
And how so?
prosecuting is it's a political thing. How so? That'll be off the record.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Fair enough. Is there anything regarding like local laws and or even state laws as they may be applied by the prosecutor's office that you've experienced might want to share?
Yeah. So one of the big things was marijuana. It wasn't necessarily decriminalized, but the city kind of pseudo decriminalized it by Marilyn Mosby coming out and saying, "Hey, we're no longer prosecuting petty crimes like prostitution, marijuana." I think the other one was trespassing. That's the other one. So as a Rule 19, I was in the trenches when they issued that statement, and I called one of the first dockets. It had about 10, 15 marijuana cases or drug cases even, and I had to dismiss all. I had to null pros them all, just dismissal. So like, Your Honor, state will enter a null pros, state will enter a null pros due to policy, and the judges were just losing their minds. They're like, why is the office doing this? They can't do this. And eventually, like, the police were still arresting people for drugs, and they still do. They arrest them for possession with intent to distribute now instead of just possession. Paraphernalia isn't necessarily a thing anymore, but they're still arresting. But then the police are kind of, their hands are tied. Are like, what do we do now? Like, do we keep arresting? What are we doing? Because like, it's a waste of resources. So yeah, it was
So why are the police still arresting?
because it's not necessarily against the law. So the state's attorney, they can come out and say, we aren't going to prosecute
Gotcha.
X crime,
But it's still on the books.
but it's still on the books. Yeah, it's like jaywalking.
Okay.
Like, think of it like that. Like, jaywalking is a crime. If you go out and jaywalk right now, catch a cop on the wrong day, they will issue a ticket. But it's never enforced. So it's kind of the same thing. Yeah.
With your time at and how long were you at the prosecutor's office after you passed the bar?
So I was stuck as a law clerk for a little bit because they still couldn't move people around. So I passed the bar December of 2020, and I didn't come in as a prosecutor until March of 2021. I think it was actually around this time, like this week, is where I became a prosecutor. So yeah, in 2021. And then they first put us in a unit called ERU, Evidence Review Unit.
Okay.
And you're just kind of sitting there on a computer watching body-worn camera. So every cop in the city, they have body-worn camera. Sits about right here on their chest, and whenever they activate it, they just give it a tap. And once they tap it, it'll do a 30-second playback.
Okay.
So it'll start recording 30 seconds prior to them tapping it. And then after those 30 seconds, like, you'll see the hand tap, and then you'll hear like the dun dun like sound. It's like very like, it's stuck in my head.
Is that the Law and Order sound?
Yeah, no, it's not the Law and Order sound, but it's just like it's like an electronic like dun dun sound,
Gotcha.
and then you hear the audio. It syncs up. So we sit for 8 hours just watching those. If an attorney contacts the unit and is like, hey, like, we need redactions done for like the editing software, like, we need like this person's face blurred, this address blurred, this person said a phone number, we need that muted, we would take care of that. But I was there for about 4 months doing that. It teaches you how to watch the body-worn camera, like what to look for, identify Fourth Amendment issues. So you're like, okay, like, well, this guy had no reason to stop. This guy here, so like that case should be thrown out, kind of deal. And then we got booted up to district court,
Okay.
the trenches.
Okay. So Fourth Amendment issues, are you talking about Terry stops and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
what is that?
Yeah, so it'd just be like, okay, like, well, this guy, like, I'm just gonna go up and talk to him. Well, yeah, you can do that, but like, you don't have enough to like put him in cuffs then. There'd be other ones where it's like traffic stops, like if they have a broken tail light. You can't necessarily arrest them for a broken tail light. You can issue a ticket, but then say they smell marijuana. The common one is a strong smell of marijuana. They smell it coming from the car. You can pull them out of the car, pat them down, search the car for the marijuana, then they find a gun. Totally valid stop. But then you have ones where like a cop, you know, just, you got a guy walking on the street, hands in his hoodie pocket, doesn't look menacing or anything, and then the cop just goes up, grabs him, starts patting him down. Okay, that might be an issue. Then you have to analyze, okay, what did the cop see? Oh, well, I saw the outline of a gun. How did you see, you know, stuff like that. So you got to go a little bit further. But there's cases where it's just like, there's no reason. Like, this case should be thrown out immediately, yeah.
Interesting. So what have you seen on these, when you're reviewing the video footage? Have you seen anything?
I mean, it could be anything. So like with ERU, we just get like assignments for the day. Like there's no like specific unit we're assigned to. So one day you could just be like, you get like 20 traffic videos. They're all the same.
Okay.
It's so boring. But then some days you'll be like, okay, like I got a theft or an assault. I remember one case I had, really unfortunate. It was a murder case. So it was a shooting somewhere on the west side of Baltimore, and basically the cops arrived just as this gentleman was dying. And so I'm watching this body-worn camera, reviewing it, and I have to watch from multiple angles about 20 times this individual take his last breaths after he was shot. And yeah, so it could be anything.
Okay.
So I hated running into those videos. Yeah, it's sad, but yeah.
Okay. I guess working at the prosecutor's office, you might have, I guess, a more in-depth view of the city, right? A more detailed view of the city.
Sure.
And some of the problems in it from specifically a criminal point of view. I'm going to kind of leave that as an open door. Like, is there anything you want to, I guess?
Yeah, I think prosecuting it should be the last resort. It shouldn't be the first resort. So I know there's a lot of issues in the city. I know you run Baltimore Students Foundation. We need more resources for the younger generation, for those communities. You need education, you need job availability. Because I know there's a big issue with like the squeegee kids now. They resort to that because there's no opportunities available for them. And instead of just putting them through the criminal justice system immediately, that should be a last resort thing. It shouldn't just be the immediate go-to. So Baltimore, there just needs to be an investment of resources elsewhere instead of into policing is what I'll leave it at.
Right. And that, obviously, what you're saying is that would reduce the crime.
Sure, yeah. And if it's not going to be an immediate thing either. It's
Right.
like a lot of people think like with Ivan Bates coming into office, like things are going to change immediately. Like it's a long process and people expect immediate results. So it's going to take 5-10 years down the line until you start seeing those results. The next generation's coming up and, getting those resources for them to have better lives.
Gotcha. So let's come back to your stories as a prosecutor, because I'm fascinated.
Criminal law is sexy. Like that's what it is. Like everyone's always like, criminal law is the sexy one. You're in court, you're in trial almost every day. Like it's sexy. That's what it is.
Tell us more, man. Tell me more stories. I feel like you've seen some crazy stuff. We're in Baltimore City. Like,
yeah,
we have the highest murder rate.
Yeah,
like year after
we're
year.
up there. We're up there.
Yeah. One of the highest, and I'm sure you've seen some crazy things. Like let's just dive into it. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, my cases have usually. So at one point, there were only about 5 of us that could do traffic cases,
Okay.
especially DUIs. So DUIs, I'm not condoning them. They're fun to handle. They're fun. They were fun to handle because we worked with, especially in the courthouse we worked with the MDTA police, so the tunnel cops.
Okay.
And they are trained in DUIs. They know what they're looking for. They know what they're doing. So I had a case, just keeping it very vague. This lady, she was swerving about 30 miles. It's about 3 a.m. on 695. She's swerving 30 miles an hour. It's about 4 lanes. She's just going like this across all 4 lanes. It's like she's weaving traffic. She's like the pace car, just back and forth, back and forth. Cops eventually pull her over. She gets out. And she's like, "Oh, I was just like looking at my phone, like I was lost." And I made this argument in court, and I was like, "Your Honor, like if I'm lost on the highway, I'm pulling over and pulling my phone up, or at least not swerving, across 4 lanes, 30 miles an hour." But they do the field tests on her, and she bombs almost all of them. And the reason she bombed all of them, except the eye test where they flash the light in your eye and like track your eye thing, is because she had a Brazilian butt lift. Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah. So she wasn't able to do the walk and turn properly because it was pretty fresh.
Okay.
I hate saying that word. It was pretty fresh. It was recently done is the correct way to say it. So she couldn't do the walk and turn. She couldn't do the one leg stand properly. And I pointed that out to the judge. I was like, "Your Honor, throw those tests out. Like she's still wasted."
Right.
So that was one of those cases. The ones where there's people that always piss themselves, puke all over themselves. I just had like a lot of assault cases are always just like he said, she said cases. I really liked handling the gun cases because it wasn't necessarily formulaic, but there was just something about them, like the way they're handled. Because you almost always get a motion to suppress, where the defense attorney is always like, well, it's an illegal stop, so you can't bring the gun into evidence. So you get to argue, why the stop is legal. So it's just like the intricacies of that. I remember I had a case. This guy, he was maybe 16 or 17, and he had gone to an O's game, and he was underage drinking, like stupid thing from him to do. He blacked out. He got kicked out of the stadium, and him and his buddy are like somewhere walking around Pigtown. So it's a bit away from Camden Yards. Don't know how he ended up there. They're just walking down the street, arms are super wasted. This lady comes out of her house. She had a bone to pick with them for some reason. And she pushes one of them over and then just curb stomps the shit out of him. Like,
wow.
Puts him on the floor, punches him like 20, 30 times, just curb stomps him out of nowhere.
Wow.
Yeah. And then she's like, well, he like knocked on my door and was like harassing me. It's all on video from a warehouse. And it's like nothing like that happened. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was one of the crazy ones. You get a lot of victims that are vocal. They want to control the case. So like I had an individual where I looked at the entire case and I spent hours on this case. Talked to my supervisors, I talked to other attorneys in the office, and I was like, is there any way I can put this on? Because this victim is hounding me, and like it's a case I feel like it should go forward. No evidence to go forward. We could not meet the standard beyond a reasonable doubt. So I get to court and I explain it to him, and I'm like, look, sir, like I have to dismiss this because like I have an ethical obligation to put on cases that are legitimate, that can go forward. If I can't meet my burden, I can't put on a case. So I dismiss the case, and it's a shit show in the courtroom. Things are flying everywhere. Not necessarily, but like it's bad. So I'm just like, okay, like I'm just gonna stand aside and just let him out of it. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Did the judge interfere? I mean, did they tell the bailiff?
They do sometimes. So it depends on how vocal they get. I've had cases where I told the victim, I was like, look, like this is what we have to offer. This is what we're going on. And the victim's like, well, I don't agree with that. And I was like, but I told you in an email like prior and you agreed to it. And I just let them mouth off, and the judge will just shut them up and just be like, hey, like now's not the time. Like we'll put you in contempt. Yeah. So the judges at district court were usually pretty good about it. They kept things in line. But if they wanted someone to keep talking to hurt themselves, like they would sometimes just sit back and let it happen and continue and just be like, okay, state, like, what do you have to say about that? And you're just like, yep, it's my explanation. They're like, okay, good enough. Get out of my courtroom.
Interesting. So since we're talking about judges, you mentioned earlier that, when you were null processing all these marijuana cases, like the judges were like pushing back a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about what these judges were saying, what they were thinking?
So I think the traditional school of thought is that, marijuana is a gateway drug. It's going to lead to cocaine, heroin, fentanyl is a big problem in the city. Then they're going to be getting guns. They're going to be stealing cars. They're going to be shooting people. It's just a slippery slope argument. And they were kind of thinking that like, okay, well, everything's going to shit now. That's kind of the thought process. But I haven't looked at the data or like the statistics, but like, did anything realistically change? No.
Gotcha. You just noticed people more openly.
Yeah, and that's the thing too now is that Maryland voted to legalize marijuana, and that's coming in July. Right. So now I think like an issue is, okay, how does the court deal with that? Because you can't pursue marijuana, but you can still be charged for like a DWI for driving under the influence of smoking marijuana. How do you search a car now? Because that's a big thing with cops is they would say, oh, I smell the strong odor of marijuana or burnt marijuana.
Right.
Can't use that anymore.
What is, okay, I'm going to ask this. What is the best way to deal with a traffic stop? Like if you're pulled over by the cops.
Disclaimer, this is not legal advice.
Not legal advice.
Not legal advice.
Just pointers, maybe.
You hands 2 and 10, super courteous. If they ask you, do you know the reason I'm pulling you over? Shut your mouth. Do not say anything
I understand
because
you're screwed either way, right?
yes
or no, yeah.
But if you say, oh, I'm sorry, I was speeding,
Right.
they have a they
Right.
have a reason for stopping you now. Like
Right.
that's the reason they stopped you.
Right.
Make them tell you why. Especially because a lot of cops have body worn camera now. Make them tell you why. No, officer, what was I doing? You were speeding back there. Don't say anything after that. Just don't even say okay, I'm sorry, because that kind of is an acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, I did it. Just keep your mouth shut. Don't make sudden movements. They ask for your ID, whatever. Just tell them, be like, hey, like my ID is in my back pocket. I'm gonna reach for it. Is that okay? You know, you reach for it. Okay, I'm gonna go to my glove box. It's there. Whatever.
I don't even
yeah.
like. I'm gonna be honest. I don't even like reaching for it. Like,
Yeah, same.
when I see that I'm getting pulled over, I pull over. I pull my ID out. It's in my hand.
Oh
already.
no,
Like,
I don't even do that because then they're like, "What are you reaching for back there? Like, why were you reaching as you were being pulled over? What are you stashing back there? Oh, I have a reason to believe you're stashing a gun. You know, drugs.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen cases. Yeah, I've seen those cases like that. So, do everything with them present. Be slow and meticulous with your movements. Don't volunteer information. And if you don't have a way to fight it in court, just go in and just do guilty with an explanation. Just never prepay your tickets. Just go and explain to the judge why you got that ticket. You know, you were speeding. Oh, sorry. Like, I was just running late to work, whatever. Like, don't make up excuses, but like, judges are people too. They're humans. They will listen to it and they'll be like, yeah, shit. Like, you're going 80 on 695. Speed limit's 55, but every traffic is going 75. We'll bump it down to a 60. You're going 60 in a 55 ticket or something like that. Again, not every judge is going to do that. Some judges will slam you with the whole thing, or they won't even give you the ticket. They'll just give you a probation before judgment if your driving record's clean. But if you feel you have a reason, fight it in court. Explain to the cop. If a cop says, yeah, I got you going 70 in a 55, well, how did you do that? Are you using a radar? Like, are you using, the little radar guns? Okay, when was it last calibrated? What's the working operation of it? You said I was going 70, but you were sitting on the median with no radar. How can you determine I'm going 70? Some cops will go behind you and pace you. They'll explain that procedure of like, okay, well, like every dash on the highway is X long. There was 3 stuff like that. Okay, but then your odometer. How's your speedometer working? Is that working? When was it last calibrated? So again, not legal advice.
Yeah.
Don't do this shit.
Yeah.
But there's, yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. Let's leave it at that. Yeah, there's ways.
Yeah. So, would you say that Baltimore's obviously like any major city in America? It's a blue city, right? It's run by Democrats.
Yeah.
Would you say that, despite it being run by Democrats, it's still implementing some criminal policies or something that maybe a little, I don't know, not so liberal,
More conservative leaning.
Yeah.
I mean,
In the past, and sorry to cut you off. In
No,
the past,
no,
it
it's
seems
good.
like we have, right, with prior mayors, we've done some things that were.
It just depends on who's like running the administration too. Because I know with Ivan Bates, he's reversing a lot of Mosby policies. She was very liberal, and, again, not prosecuting prostitution, drugs, some theft, trespassing. But then with Ivan Bates, I believe he's like reversed on all that, and he's prosecuting them again. So it's kind of their mentality of what issues Baltimore has and how they need to be solved.
Okay.
So it kind of flip-flops back and forward, yeah.
Do you have any personal opinions as to, what might be the best way to kind of, and this is $1 million question, right?
Sure.
Everybody tries to figure it out. Like, how do we reduce crime? I know you mentioned like reinvestment in.
I mean, that's what it is you give back to the community. You stop giving so much money to the police
But from a criminal point of view, right? From a prosecution point of view, from the criminal justice system point of view, what
right.
what kind of policies can we implement while we're kind of working on that 5-10 year plan of putting money back in the communities?
Sure. So you want to have deterrence, and you want to deter other people from committing the same crimes. So how do you do that? You tend to implement higher policy or higher sentences. But then it becomes
more of a tough on crime approach, though, right?
right. But then it becomes an issue of, well, Joe over here, he's going to be made the example. He's getting 20 years in jail for a crime that would normally get him like 3 years. And then people are like, oh shit, okay, well maybe they're going a little bit tougher on that, so we should stop. But does that necessarily work? No. So it's a rock and a hard place. It's been debated for years, and it's just like, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can't really do much. I think it's you just go back to that and reinvest in the community and start from the bottom up.
Okay. Awesome. Any parting words of wisdom for the next generation of lawyers, or our generation of lawyers?
Wrong person to ask. No, I think going back to how we first started is set your boundaries, check your mental health, and kind of don't be afraid to go against the grain. Again, with mental health, I think there's a huge issue with character and fitness when you're applying for the bar, where they will look into your mental health and like everything kind of going on. So a lot of people, they'll have anxiety, depression, and they're kind of scared to get help. Because I know during law school I was very depressed. I was miserable. My mental health took a toll, and I didn't reach out to get help because I was scared about character and fitness coming back and looking at that negatively. So there are resources out there, but you're kind of scared to use them because of those implications of character and fitness. Ultimately, like, they'll find you fit to practice law. They don't really care if you're anxious or, depressed or anything. They just want to make sure that you're going to be a good, competent lawyer that's going to, represent your client's interests, that you're not going to steal or embezzle money or anything, or just being a dick. It doesn't really matter because they're dick attorneys. But like that, you're just not going to be like a bad reflection of a lawyer in the state of Maryland. So definitely, mental health, keep that in check. Again, set your boundaries. X time to go to bed, always. Don't stay up till 3 a.m. studying. Your brain's not going to retain that information. Try and get your 8 hours of sleep. Eat your meals. And again, go against the grain. When I was in school, a lot of my friends, I know you did journal. I don't know if you ever did moot court.
I did.
Yeah, so you did journal and moot court. Those are like the big popular things. Right. Those are things that land on a resume. People are like, that's what we're looking for. It's what we're looking for.
I shouldn't have done it. But.
Right. Yeah. No. It's go against the grain. I didn't do those things.
Yeah.
And I was fine with how I ended up. Even with a clinic, you don't need to do a clinic. The clinic was good for me because it gave me that litigation experience, and it was like, okay, I realized the kind of attorney I want to be, a trial attorney. So it helped me push to that. But like, don't be afraid to, like, if all your friends are doing journal, don't feel the need to do journal. Put yourself out there a different way. Go to networking events, volunteer, reach out to attorneys, do a mentorship program. There are other ways. Right. Law school isn't the end all be all. It's not formulaic. Find what works for you and push through it and make a hell of an attorney.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Patrick. This was great.